Appreciate it.
Well, first of all, thanks for being here on a beautiful Saturday morning. We're delighted, thrilled to have Donald Sultan in Charlotte and to present this exhibition. It's almost impossible. It would take 40 minutes to introduce the man. His accomplishments are astonishing. He's had over 50 solo exhibitions, including the Guggenheim, the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney, Tate Modern in London, the small museum in Raleigh, the North Carolina Museum, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo, just for a few. Donald's a North Carolinian, born and raised here in Asheville. Tomorrow he's going to Asheville to see his mother, who's 102.
Wow.
And he has received the North Carolina Award, highest award the state can bestow on a civilian. The NEA Visual Arts Fellowship. I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill, as well as a master's from the Art Institute of Chicago. So with that tiny introduction, we're going to chat a little bit. Hope you all will ask a lot of questions. So everyone, please welcome Donald Sultan. Where do we begin, Donald? Well, we'll start with what I just said. I know that you've been back to the Carolinas on several occasions. How does it feel to come back on such a beautiful Saturday morning? And is there anything about your Carolina roots that you think affects you, influences your work?
Well, I guess the only thing that would influence my work from there was growing up. I grew up working in my father's tire shop and doing really terrific theater in Asheville. Starting when I was about 8 years old, I would go to work with my father in the summers and holidays, and just watching the changes that happened there, but being around the workmen. He had a kind of a gang of, buffers and people who ground the tread off the tires before they put them in the retread machines. And they had this room for that, and he was in there buffing them, and it was like he was in a coal mine. It was this man with, I guess he was an Australian, been a veteran, sat on this chair. It was black as night in there, tons of little bits of rubber, and smoking Camel cigarettes, and I thought this was the best place I'd ever been. So I'd sit in there and talk to him. But the workmen were really great with me, and I just spent a lot of time around people who were actually working, and I worked, the best I could at a certain age, inventory basically. But he had an elevator that was very similar to the elevator I had in my first studio in New York, where you stuck your head in a shaft and pulled a cord and it came up and down. There's no doors or anything on it. And I thought that was pretty great too, but it was a little scary. But by the time I got to New York, I was used to that kind of thing. But I'd always hear, there was an artist who really was famous, kind of contemporary of Mondrian and Ilya Bolotonsky. And he fell down the elevator shaft and died. We lost a couple of people like that. In fact, Marcus Souvero putting something up on one of those things with a sculpture on top, and it went too high up and came down and crushed him. And that's why he was pretty much paralyzed forever. He walked finally with a limp and a cane. So those elevators weren't, great, more to say, but you had to be used to them.
I'll interject a moment, because I don't think Donald knows this either. It was a Sunday afternoon in New York City, and I was on a studio visit with Ilya Bolotowski. Wonderful man, wonderful artist. And I was leaving the studio, and Ilya said, "I'm going to go take a nap." I said, "Ilya, you go do that. We'll speak again soon." And I left. An hour and a half later, Ilya's son came to see him and rang the elevator bell. And Ilya was a little bit groggy, you know, from having a nap. And Ilya fell down the elevator shaft. I was the last person to see him alive. And it was a tragic moment, but I would have never brought that up had you just not.
Well, there's quite a few artists that went down those elevator shafts. I had a gate. I had a gate that we could slide down in front of some little wooden railing. It was, you know, just like putting a baby railing up, so you wouldn't normally. I had people working for me, and I insisted that they always pull that down because I didn't want anybody to back into that. But sometimes we would move things on top of the elevator, and that was tricky and quite dangerous. But, you know, we were young. We thought nothing would happen, and we were right. But there was a lot of those elevators. But I'd gotten used to it when my father had that. And then there's actually elevators in San Francisco that just keep going up, and you step onto them as they go. They don't have doors either. That's pretty interesting. They have them in London too. But anyway, so, you know, I was used to being around, you know, industrial materials. The tar, you know, kind of was natural for me to work with.
Well, that's the segue to what I was going to say.
So that's, and also, you know, your childhood is sort of formative years. And Asheville, the mountains were just terrific for, you know, we would go camping and we'd get horseback riding. And I used to ride horses a lot. I don't even know, I think the last time I was on a horse, I was at boarding school, and I hadn't ridden a horse since I was like maybe 12. And the horse kept trying to bite me. And I got off the horse and I grabbed the bridle and I punched the horse in the nose and led the horse back and said, "I'm not riding this horse." And that was the last time I was on a horse. Because a horse, if they're not trained well, they're tough to handle. And I learned from I got on a horse and it would go out, but they'd just run around and go back in the barn and try to rub me against the fence. And I thought, what are these people trying to kill me? So I stayed away from riding horses. But we used to go camping with horses, and you know, that was kind of nice. But what I never understood is the joy everybody had by jumping in the old mountain streams with their inner tubes, because they were just so cold. I never went in it. I just couldn't go in the water. But no, so you know, you form that. But basically, my comfort with painting and drawing is basically the feeling of making something and working with my hands and actually wrestling with something rather than illustrating it. Well, so that's where that all comes from. So I imagine the answer to your question, you know, to make a short story long, is yes.
So many of the materials you use are unconventional and come quite directly from your childhood in the tire shop. So, you know, you use tar, house paint, linoleum, tiles, all sorts of things.
A lot of that came from theatrical set design too. I worked in theater, professional theater for a while. I worked on making sets and painting sets, and then I did construction. I helped build lofts when I moved to New York. So all that was incorporated into the work. In fact, the use of tiles I got from some workmen working on an elevator. They were tiling the floor of the elevator, and I asked them how they cut around the circle in the middle, which is the brakes. And they said, just heat it up and cut it with a net knife. And I said, oh, well, let me have a piece. And so they gave me a couple. I went home and put them on the stove, and that started the whole thing right there. But the black, the tar, I actually got the idea from because when I was inlaying the imagery in the linoleum, I would cut it out and inlay it. And you use a black glue. It's like a bulldog glue, I think. But so the first paintings I made with tile that was meant to go on the wall, I sent to a show in Chicago, and they just fell off. And I realized that wasn't the glue meant for a vertical. So I decided I would glue the tiles down and then just cover it with black rubber, tar, which is so I just flipped the color of the glue and put it on the top, and then I would cut into that. So that's kind of where it came from. All these things are sort of simple when you're doing it, but after, many years of doing many things with these things, they really have gotten to take a lot of time. And every beginning instance of things that I've done are in every piece here.
Tell us a little about your imagery. Through the years, when I first became aware of your work, it was the large black eggs and lemons. And there's been a natural progression with your imagery, but tell us about it a little bit. At the moment, obviously it's poppies and mimosas.
Well,
I don't mean the orange juice and champagne kind. I know.
Well, I don't even know what that means. But nevertheless, I started making drawings using the caulking gun of the rubber, so that the lines were made and sat on the surface. And the imagery I was using at the time was meant to be an image of either looking out a window in the city and seeing part of a building with a smokestack, or if turning it upside down, you would be looking into the window and that would be a table. And these came from in my studio. I would be working and I'd look out the window. But then when you look out a window in New York, you never see a whole thing, you only see parts of things. So I started using them for making drawings of that. And I made imagery that were basically industrial images. They were smokestacks with fire, and buildings and building canyons, which is the space between the buildings when you look down the avenues and you see the sky. It makes a kind of upside down building. And I started with a smokestack with fire. And the smokestack was one that I would see on the way to the airport from New York through Queens. But I was also familiar with them from being in Chicago and looking at Gary, Indiana. And we sort of had a bulb, it would go up and it would have a sort of a bulbous release, and then it would go up again, and the fire would be coming on the top, burning off methane or whatever they were doing. And I called those urban flowers, and or irises actually. So I started to draw the iris and using just this pencil graphite and the color yellow for the color of the iris. And so that was like a flame. And I'm just going to cut through to a lot of different things. I started making tulips because I'd gone to a collector's house for dinner once. She had a dinner party. And she had on her table, she had a kind of lazy Susan, a big, beautiful mahogany polished table with a lazy Susan in the center, but in the center was a huge bouquet of tulips that were maybe this tall, and they all were perfectly straight. And I thought, wow, I really loved that. So I went back and I bought a bunch of tulips and I put them in water, and they just went, So I really did, I kept trying, I kept cutting them shorter and so on and so on. And so finally I said to her, where did you get the tulips that were straight like that? She said, well, you put a wire on the stem. I was like, well. Anyway, but I started drawing the tulips as I had them, kind of going all over the place. But I would use a charcoal and make them very dense, because I wanted them to be like charcoal made out of like tire dust or grit. And I made a lot of these, and they're almost balletic. And so I made a lot of those, and I did them on different kinds of handmade papers, things I picked up in Japan from shows. And one day I was in the Met looking at the Manet exhibition with a painter friend of mine. We looked at this little yellow lemon, And he said, that looks like your tulips, but without the stem. And I thought, no, it's true. So I went back and I drew a lemon, and I just compressed it with just as much black grit as I could. And that started making these black lemons, and they had such weight that I started using the paper as a way to hold the volumes of these things. And I used a lot of charcoal, a lot of fixative. And you could even hold the charcoal, could get stuck on it and the pieces in there. And then somebody asked me if I wanted to do prints, and I said yes, and I used roofing copper, big pieces of roofing copper, and we had to have a press made especially for this, and an aquatint box, because I wanted it to be 60 by 40 inches, the size of the drawings I was doing. And I'd use the same way, and I think it's one of the first uses of aquatint like this. It was a sort of a new way of looking at it. I would drop the aquatint. If any of you know about printing, it's a resin you drop on copper, and they use a stop out, and then you etch it, and then you can get different gradations of gray or black with it, depending on how you use it. But I dropped the aquatint on the plate, and then made the drawing in the powder by blowing away the part that wasn't the lemon. And that left the plate open all around, but since a little bit would get stuck, roofing copper isn't that polished, you could have a kind of a granite-like white outline of this lemon. So I did it, and I thought, that is just like a sock in the eye. It was just a powerful image that was both negative and positive, but it was so big that it really stayed burned into your head. So I started on that, and I made a lot of those. And then I started doing still lifes, because I thought, okay, I've been doing landscapes, now I'll do still lives. And I started using 1 foot squares, like this one in the back, the little blue one. I still make 1 foot paintings, but not so much still lives and things anymore, but different things. But it's all based on the 1 foot square linoleum tile that I used to, that are in all these two. There's this one and the one in the front that still have linoleum. The rest I don't use it anymore. But so if I wanted to, I painted lemons black with a spray can after they would dry, and then I put them in there with the still life. And it was just a still life, but it had a black lemon in it. And I used it's the same method of using these, but making some of them kind of realistic. But not, they weren't really supposed to be. They were more like a bowl of plaster fruit, really, is what it was kind of like. And then I thought, after I was making the lemons, I did the same with eggs, big black eggs. And I walked to a Chinese supermarket, and there they were in a box, a barrel, 100-year-old eggs they called them, and they were packed with a black tea that was like unbelievably beautiful. So I said, it really exists. So I took it and I put that in the still lives, and then I made these still lives with eggs. And the funny thing is when I went to France, I had white eggs, so I used those. And when I came back, the eggs here that we were buying were brown, so I had to paint those white. And the lemons were yellow, and I had to paint those black. So it was kind of a funny thing to do. And I did a number of drawings of roses, dried roses, and things that I would paint black. I made black bouquets, painted them all black, and left them like laying on them, sort of horizontal. So I got to making quite a bit of flowers, and then I thought, I'll now do, fruits. I decided to do flowers and bring back floral painting. So that would give me still lives, landscapes, and florals. But the florals too, I wanted to use a combination of the handmade or the industrial or the artificial things like a pot or a vase, and then use the flowers stuffed in the vase would be like the fire coming out of the smokestack. That would be order and chaos. So I got to making those, and that took on a whole life of its own. And so I made a lot of those, and then I would do flowers, on a tree. Like I made morning glories as they would grow on the side of the house. And that started making it from the front, where you would have the flower and the white center where the stem would connect to it. And that's where these sort of came from. But I switched it over to poppies because of the flowers that the veterans wear on Veterans Day for World War I slaughter at Flanders. And the French ones are very much like this. The American ones are crepe paper, but those are like round, really, with the center is the pin, black pin. And the British are the same way. So it fit. And when I was doing them, I kept thinking, well, if I was really a minimalist, which I sort of am, and not totally, they would have all been, every one I made would always be red. I wouldn't make any other colors. But then I got seduced, and I started making other colors. So I'm still doing that. But I like that form. I've changed the form off and on to be less floral and more round, almost like the Morning Glory kind of looks. They really aren't meant to be a real drawing of a poppy. They're sort of made up flowers, but they could be any kind of flower, frankly. And so I call them poppies because of that. And so that's kind of where everything came from. And I'm still working on it. The mimosas, came from the flower centers and from someone who sent me a mimosa as a little note once from France in February, and I'd never seen them before. Little yellow flowers in February. I thought, isn't that great? And I forgot about them for about 20 years. But then it came back to me, so I started to think, well, I'll see what that looks like. And I started making big drawings of those, and then they ended up in the paintings. And so these are called lantern flowers. And these came off of some Chinese lanterns that I had bought for my garden in Sag Harbor. And I hang them in the garden and light them up. And they have this kind of funny, the way they're just painted. It has Chinese lettering on one side, these sort of flowers on the other side. And I eliminated some of the flowers that were in there, just used this kind of grouping and blew it up. I call them lantern flowers. It wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but that's where the image comes from. So they all come from something that I can see, although I don't copy it. So that's pretty much what I've been doing.
So there's obviously an enormous amount of color. Where does this color inspiration come from? And these works are similar, but everyone different, and different colors. And normally there's just one color within these drawings, as opposed to more. Is there a reason for this?
Well, once enough. But the truth is that you get the idea from. I mean, flowers have a lot of color. I never really invented a color, but the flowers per se. This color is the flowers I was copying were, somebody painted. It wasn't a real flower, and these also don't have the kind of hand feet touch in them, so that they're called artificial. I think of this as an artificial group because they're more or less, like lacquered, so they can be any color. So a lot of the colors come from old cars, the colors of old cars. And I've used that in a number of paintings, but a lot of things come from old cars. I made fuzzy dice paintings that meant to look like they're hanging off the top of the painting, and then I started using felt, or flocking actually. And they use the colors of like a Bel Air, or the old 50s cars, 60s cars, a two-tone. And I made a bunch of those that were highly polished black flowers. They were meant to be artificial, and they were against modernism, I called them. They were sort of like buttoned down modernism. The idea being that all of the great modern pictures can make a great shirt and a text fabric. So I just put them right on top of that. And the best one, the first one I did was right over Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie, because I think they made a lot of dresses out of that in the 60s. And so once you do that, then you can use silver, like the one over here in the pretty much any industrial color, copper colors, silver colors, gold, brown, and, you know. But the paintings of flowers that I made were generally the color of the flower that I was painting.
This particular show showcases really everything you do. The paintings, the conte crayon drawings,
Yeah.
and the screen prints. Do you
Sculpture.
prefer, do you like an exhibition like this, which has a little bit of a survey in it, media survey?
Yes, because otherwise it's boring. I mean, I always thought if I was a person who painted striped paintings every day, I would just kill myself. And one of the reasons that I stopped, you know, just doing abstract work, which is what I started doing in college. I would make very thick plastic, poured plastic, or you know, spattering and things like that. But I realized that if I did that for the rest of my life, would I ever see any improvement? So I thought I'll tackle imagery, which I can see as I go, what I'm able to do differently. And originally I would do it all on a lot of different images on one canvas, but then I decided it was more interesting. My first big shows in New York were always mixed with either a disaster painting or a landscape, a flower, and a fruit. They're just mixed up. So like, the idea would be reading the newspaper, and you'd read about a plane crash, and you'd have a cup of coffee, and you'd have flowers on the table. So everything was just depending on where your days would go at any one time. And so I, you know, I kind of narrowed it down to that. And I'd never had a show that was only one image, really, in an exhibition. There's always some other way of approaching it. It's always a little bit mixed.
Many people are unfamiliar with the term conte crayon. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, first of all, it's not, they don't make it anymore. It's very hard to get. I had to order it from England, which is weird. But originally we could buy boxes of one color. You can buy them now, and you know, for kids, I guess they're like you get one in each color in a little box, but that doesn't serve me. But conte crayon is a dense colored pastel, basically, but it's not a pastel. Pastels are softer, and these are medium soft, and the charcoal, like the blacks, are soft. So you have a much denser compression of color in the conte crayon. They're very, very dense with color, and they're really strong. And I thought I was going to have to give it up at one point because I couldn't get it. One of my studio assistants found an art supply store in a college in Maine, and we bought all the boxes they had, which was quite a lot. And so I still have some of those. But some colors you run out of, the ones you use the most. And so we were lucky to find them in this store in London, and they can get some. So I can still use it, but it's really an incredible color. I don't use it for much, but for this, I've never, you know, pastels you can do, you know, portraits and all kinds of things. Like they're like oil paints, you can use them to make really detailed imagery, but I don't do that. So I need the dense color to kind of compress into these colors. That's what it is. I'm sure it's made in some different way, but I don't know what it is.
Well, I have this whole list of questions, and I'm looking at them, and he's answered them all. But
well, I was just going to say that one in the front that's black that has that sort of lozenge shape.
Yes, the large painting.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
if you compress that lozenge down, you'll have a circle. So I decided to just pull that out. I did a few of those too. I like those paintings. But that's kind of the last of the ones made on linoleum. The first button down modernist paintings were on linoleum, and then I quit because I didn't. Once you start using flocking, I did not need the linoleum anymore.
What would you like all of us to take away from your work?
Take away whatever they can.
What would
I can't say what they can take away. I mean, I basically think that when you look at any work of art, you can only take away whatever you know. And if you don't know what you're looking at, but it gets you somehow. You'll find it, and you'll find out what it is. I mean, if you go to a museum, I think it was the French poet Paul his name didn't come to me right now, but he said that one of the saddest things he thought was going into a museum filled with paintings, because it was like going into an orphanage where every kid was screaming for your attention. And it was that ripped from its natural place. And there's truth to that. So basically, if you go to a museum and you look at paintings, the most you'll ever spend in front of a painting for the first time is probably, if you're somewhat captivated, maybe 15 seconds, something like that, and before you go to another one. So the painting has to say something to you to make you come back and look at it again. And when you don't know a lot, you'll be surprised. The first paintings that you fall in love with over time, the more you know, you won't like them as much, because your viewing and it will get more complicated than the artist that made the painting. So you'll go to a painting that's more advanced, and you'll keep coming back to that. And hopefully, you'll carry it with you in your mind. I mean, I certainly do about certain paintings. It's hard for me I have great friends who are really smart. They do not get Pollock. They don't understand it. They look at it, they just don't get it. And, I'm not going to explain it to them, because I don't care if they get it or not. But it's a true thing. I mean, if you don't know where that comes from, what the history of art is in the broader sense, you aren't going to get Jackson Pollock. I mean, you might think they look okay, but there's a lot of things that look okay. But that's sort of an example I use of how you can come to understand a work of art. I think the first artist I saw that I really loved was Botero. And now I can't stand it. But this has happened. And I remember seeing Daumier, not Daumier, Rousseau, Henri Rousseau, the sort of primitive artist. And I remember I was probably 18, and I was backpacking through Europe. And I went into the Stedelijk, and I went downstairs and I saw this painting, and it actually knocked me back. It was the snake charmer painting of his, and the way he had painted the water, it seemed like it was coming in, and I've always had this attachment to that painting. And I don't know if you know what the painting is, but it's a guy playing a flute in a jungle in supposedly Indiana with a snake around his neck and a lagoon behind him. It's just I don't know if it's that great of a painting, but to me it is. But it just really did knock me down. And also Rembrandt's really knocked me down. And when in the National Gallery in London, I went looking, and they had this room of Rembrandt's, and they had Saskia bathing, and which is a picture of his wife going into the river, and she's pulled up her night shirt. She's into about her knees, and in front of the painting were two young people making out. And I thought, that is great. But there's a lot of sites like that in London. But Seurat too, I just love Seurat. And I was looking at the Grand Jean at the Art Institute, and my friend was British, and he said, this wasn't bad for a 28-year-old, was it? Because that's when he made it, when I was 28.
Wow.
But he died very shortly. He died around the age of 32 or something like that.
All right, everyone, please, I'm going to insist that you ask us questions.
Okay.
Would you ever do a piece where you had not all the different colors, but several colors in one?
I have done that. Yeah, I did. I thought I showed something. It's at the Virginia Museum. It's called 28 Flowers, but it's a shape of the flowers, but it's really a color chart of all the colors of flocking. So each one in the row is the way a color chart looks, and there's 28 of them. And it's pretty nice. Yeah, I've done actually quite a few where there's been that kind of.
With the poppies?
Not with these, but I've done poppies I've done mix of poppies. I've done black and gold leaf together.
But not a variety.
I've never done a bunch of colors of these because I don't know why, I just never did. It seems like they're good enough.
Please?
They are.
Barbara?
Yeah.
You've mentioned how some things have come to your attention, like the mimosas. I'm curious about, obviously, things come in front of your eyes all of the time. I'm interested in what arrests your attention enough to want to give it your time.
I don't know. Well, every image that you make has some ideological construct to it, and it has something to do with my beliefs, my belief structures of what art is. So everything I do has an ulterior motive. When I made the artificial poppies, I thought of them as buttons, and buttons is a strong image, but its purpose is to conceal something. So it struck me as, and there was a lot of things about it where, in the 30s, during the Depression, people would send their kids off to school with an extra button sewn in their shirt in case they lost a button. They had an extra one in case, But I thought that was also fantastic. So I made a lot of button paintings, which kind of go like this, but they would have 2 or 4 eyes, where you would sew it. I had also, I did an illustration of a book called Bar Mitzvah with David Mamet, the playwright. One of the images I used was black buttons on the background was a prison, gray and white, blue coat. And the threads that held it together were gold leaf, because if you lost the button, you couldn't keep your pants on. They would shoot it. That was all there was to it. So the thread and the button became the only thing between life and death. So I just found these kinds of things, like poppies are also opium. And they mean, they can be, good things like wildflowers or flowers, or they can be drugs, or they can be commemorative of great tragedies. So everything has some purpose to it that I choose.
Could you say more about your ideology in terms of what art is? I know you're speaking to that, but could you say more?
Well, it's not too much that I can really say what art is. I say that art is something that's transmitted by the artist to the object, and the object will give it back if it's art. For example, if an artist stacks a bunch of rocks on the street, when you see it, you're going to know it's art if he's an artist, and that's an art piece, rather than just a pile of rock. Why is that? I don't know, but that's true. And there's a theater involved with art. It's all around it. It's speaking and not speaking, but it doesn't lose the transference between the person who made it and its ability to return that. And it's free. So, I always thought movies as art are lazy people, because it's when it's over, it's over. You've got the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's a closed system. But art is not a closed system. It requires the viewer to do some work. And but the funny part about movies is that the people who make the movies, the technicians and stuff, they are artists. But the movie itself is hardly ever art. It's like a great glass blower that makes a little giraffe for the tourists, It's like, they could be artists, but the things they're making is not art. And they can't make art. They don't know how to do that. They can do the craft, but they can't make the art. It's funny. Some people can do that, and some people can't. So I can't tell you what art is, but I can tell you that that's one of the things it does.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Please? Oh, yes.
Do you paint for yourself or for the viewer?
Well, I can't paint for the viewer. I'm a viewer. And I thought in the beginning that, when I made a still life, people would say, you're making, fashion still lives. I said, no, I'm not. because I'm making them. And I'm not making an old-fashioned still life. It can't be. If I tried to make an old-fashioned, like Flemish still life, which people can make, they can do it. I can't do that, but they can. But I generally don't consider that art, what they do, because it's already been done. So I didn't worry about whether or not it looked like that. I said there was no way it was going to ever be anything but art that I would make. It's not anything else. It's made out of tar and plaster. Go find another one.
Is your intent to have us look at something in a different way?
I don't have an intent of how you're supposed to look at it. I try to make it as easy to look at as I can, but what you see, I have no idea, really. And that's one of the things I liked about what Biden said about Putin, when they said, "Do you think he'll, might use nuclear weapons?" And he says, "Well, I can't tell you what's in his head. I can only tell you what he's doing." And that's a very good answer, I think. You don't know what goes on in another person's head. And sometimes you don't really want to know. You can try to protect yourself. Yeah.
I was so intrigued with the flocking on the poppy prints,
Uh-huh.
how the flocking added a different depth of field of the picture.
Yeah.
There was one picture standing back from it, but it became something totally different with the
Yeah.
raisin texture. Could you describe your process for developing that flocking?
Well, the first time I did that, I was using flocking. We were trying to get the feeling of the tar. So we used the flocking, and then they put ink over it and made it have that kind of texture. But that was with the black, to make it kind of gooey looking. But so then, since I started using flocking in colors and in different ways, we just used the flocking. And the idea, it's still to give you a feeling that there's a softness and a hardness to the image you're looking at.
So is it like a glue, then the flocking, then the ink? What gets your texture?
The technique is it's more complicated than for printing, I would think, but that's the classic way people use flocking. They make wallpaper out of it. Well, flocking was fake velvet, and it was sort of to imitate a gaufrage, which is when you take velvet and you make a pattern with an iron. You iron the pattern into it. But so they made them. You found them actually in steakhouses around the country that are meant to look like saloons and so on. So it's sprayed. They spray it, but you spray it on. You have to put a base on that's sticky, and then you spray the flocking on it, and it sticks. And then we'll print over that, and that'll give you the look. Because otherwise, it would be soft. And so once they print over it, it stays, it's kind of like
And keeps its form.
and it doesn't, it's also not as delicate. If you didn't print over it, handling it would cause problems. You would have fingerprints and things would come off it. Yeah.
So you put something sticky in it?
Well, that's not flocking. This is just the pigment. I put enough on there to where it's the powder, and then it's the fixative. We just use a lot of fixative to just glue it down, and that makes the petals.
Please, you all came this morning and you don't have any questions?
Well, they don't have to have questions. I hope they don't have questions. I hope I was speaking clearly.
What is flocking?
It's a fabric. It's like
I mean, I know
shredded.
I've seen
It's
it,
shredded.
but
It's shredded nylon.
Oh, okay.
Now it probably was shredded wool at one point. It's cotton, but it's shredded and it's like a powder. You've probably seen bobblehead dogs on the back of the car. That's flock.
And I know what you're talking about with the wallpaper, but I didn't know what the flocking was.
Yeah, it's
made of.
a fabric. I mean, linoleum with the striations in it was meant to simulate marble. So it's all fake. It's a fake version of what's it's supposed to be. But then they went off message and they made colors, different colors that wouldn't be marble. But they didn't have to make it look like marble, really. And there's a lot of different. They made such beautiful linoleum in the 50s. They had lettering in it, inlaid things, and they don't make them. And they were 9 inches, not 12. That was kind of nice. Yeah.
Oh, you're fine. Oh, you mentioned Japan,
Yeah.
and I was very interested in that comment and how that kind of influenced your looking at what you're doing.
Now, what did I say about Japan?
You said when you were in Japan, you saw handmade papers.
Oh, I used, yeah, well, they have beautiful paper shops there.
Yeah, right.
But actually, it's an interesting thing you said, because I went to Taiwan with my parents, and I went into the National Gallery there. And I was looking at they had a room of scrolls, and at the far end of the room, it looked like there were these black balls, and they were soft. So I went to look at them, and they were monkeys, but they were painted, each hair, but it looked like a solid thing from a distance, and then very much what it was when it went in. So that stayed with me when I was doing the black lemons. But that was China, or nationalist China. And Japan, a lot of people thought that I had influence by Japanese art, which I actually didn't. But I did buy a lot of papers from them and drew on. And I very much love their sensibility. I have used imagery from Japan. I made some, kind of Chinese lanterns that I would hang on a tree that was basically from a Japanese, in the No Theater, they only have one set, which is this tree. And I also used, it has round kind of leaves, the leaves of the pine tree are round, we have these too, but they shape them, and they really are good with shaping trees, but that's the only set. And I saw it, I've seen it used in theater too, in like the Mikado, they'll paint that tree, and so I've used that tree. And also in Kurosawa's movie, The Throne of Blood, the screens behind the emperor. I made a screen from one of the 5 families in Japan made us a screen. And the front is those black lemons, 3 of them, of over 6 feet, and then the back is a potato print circle with a tulip in it of different colors. And so I do get things from different places.
Well, there's quite a few children's books about making the paper cranes and trees after Hiroshima. People in Illinois working with kids in therapy. It's really interesting. I'm just very interested in Japanese art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Is the paper that you use the same paper maker for a whole series?
Yeah, well, for the larger drawings, I use the same paper I use to print on. It's a printing paper. It's called Somerset. But these are all watercolor paper, Windsor arches, and yeah. So they're all the same paper.
Are they all handmade?
No, I don't think these are handmade. Yeah.
I love your reference to dance in regard to this later piece, and not to mention the 50s cars, since I'm a child of that era. And I'm interested again in your inspiration, and there's such a lyrical quality I find in some of your work. And I'm interested in whether you're listening to music as you're working, or what other influences might be coming in.
No, I don't listen to music when I'm working. And I don't really listen to music that much, actually. Lately I've gotten into listening to Gregorian chants, which drives everybody. But when I'm drawing, I have a rhythm to them. I put a rhythm into them. And I've always done that. In fact, when I was doing the disaster paintings with fire, and I was painting in the undercoat with the flames, I would make the sound of wind against them to keep them going in a certain direction. But it's all in my own, just keeping my own body going. And my arms were making the shapes. And a lot of the shapes of these things that I try to make come from also ruined oil rigs where the wires are all snapped and they get all tangled up. And I did some oil rig paintings where that happened too. And I cut them to have that kind of, look like, almost like vines, but you have that in industrial accidents too. So I try to keep the two things that cross over between construction and destruction kind of together.
The music is from you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't listen to, I listen to music sometimes, but.
No, there's something coming through.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's your farm making day like?
Well, the studio works, we work from 10 to 6 every day. And, but since we're working, I work on different things at the same time because it takes a long time to make a painting. So there's a lot of different layers that goes into the painting. So if I'm working on one painting over here, the other painting that we're working on will be drying. So it has to be a kind of a rhythm to that so that when you're ready to work on it, that part's dry to put this on. You can't do it, otherwise you're just waiting for things, a painting to work. So it started, one thing and build up a surface on another one. So there's 2 or 3 things going on at one time. And the drawings too, they're different, so I'll be working on those too. So I try to do a lot of getting things ready so that it keeps moving as I'm ready to work on them. So, but then, you have to stop at some point.
Speaking of stopping at some point, Donald will be here for a little while. Please ask him individual questions, chat with him.
Well, it's better if you do it now because when I get up, I charge for answering questions.
And then I get
Might as well use your time here for free. Yeah.
Where is your studio, and when you say we, how many assistants do you have?
Well, I have, there are 3 people that work for me. One who does all the archiving and answering the phones and arranging to ship things and taking,
the wonderful
paying bills and stuff like that. And then I have 2 people that are working on the paintings because it takes 2 people to lift. We work up and down on the walls and the sawhorses. So it takes 2 people to move a painting. So they need to be 2 people. So they'll, most of the panels are, there's in panels, so they have to be sanded, the nails have to be sunk and filled in, and then they have to be gessoed and sanded, gessoed, sanded.
So you're actually painting horizontally.
We'll paint the base horizontally.
Yeah.
And I do make the work vertically, but the prep work is horizontal, and it'll probably take a month just to get the first thing ready to draw on. So you have to set up as you go along to make sure that if you put tar on it, that has to dry. And so you need to have sort of a little system. Pretty much every artist has to have that at some level. Somebody has to be stretching, painting while they're working, because otherwise you spend all your time doing that kind of thing. And even so, I don't make that many paintings because it takes a long time. And I don't like to get ahead of myself too much with the finished painting because I want to know for the next painting, I want that painting to tell me what to do. Because I don't want them to just make the same paintings. I have to know what I can do with the next one that painting says, you can do this a different way. And you never know. It's always surprising what I do. I mean, I just made this painting. It was all yellow. It was we had painted those in by hand. And then I started using the cement, which comes in a tube. It's a cement patch. And so the leaves are now cement. And I thought, well, I should put some tar in there too, because that'd be interesting. And I took some tar and I just touched it a couple places with a knife, just little lines, 2 or 3, maybe this big, tiny. And I thought, well, that's enough. And it set the whole thing off. So I thought, well, now the next one I have to try this. So if I get too far ahead of myself, I'll just be repeating myself. And I don't really see the point. I don't enjoy that so much, So it means that your painting will be finished, right? You finish one, you make another one. But in truth, the painting should never be finished. It has to have an open end to it. Because I have to say, nothing is more depressing than a finished painting.
There's more coffee. Please stay, chat with Donald. Thank you for being here.